In days like we are currently living in light of recent events, when these things pop up in history, it can be very scary. And when the things that have happened in recent weeks pop up in our lives, it can make us wonder what's going on. And I often get a lot of questions from people in times like this when they want to know, is Jesus getting ready to return? Is the world coming to an end? Is the rapture going to happen soon? Those kinds of questions. And the reality is that the unknown is the scariest thing we can experience. And to help with that, I want to teach you a cheesy phrase, but it's very comforting to me. When I don't know what's going on, he's still on the throne. When I don't know what's going on in the world, God is still in control. He's still on the throne. And when we encounter these seasons and the fears and the worries of what's going to happen next, is war going to break out? Is there going to be, a great tribulation? Is there going to be persecution? I don't know. I can tell you what I think in my interpretation of the Bible, but the reality is none of us knows what's going on in the grand scheme of history except God. But even when we don't know what's going on, he's still on the throne. And the good news in all of this darkness and all this struggle and all this broken world that we live in because of our broken nature as sinners is that we're not the first people to wrestle with this. Throughout the Bible, people have asked similar questions when things are allowed to happen by God, and he uses them to accomplish his purposes, but they're times of struggle, and the people don't know where God is. One particular powerful passage is found in the life of a guy named Ezekiel and what he wrote down, specifically in Ezekiel chapter 10. That Ezekiel writes down two visions he has, one in the earlier part of Ezekiel and one that we're going to look at quickly today. And these visions are kind of weird if you don't know what the symbols mean, if you don't know what they represented to Ezekiel and the people that he was writing to. You see, Israel had been defeated. Israel had been defeated by the Babylonians, and the Israelites had been taken captive, that God's temple had been destroyed, his city, Jerusalem, had been destroyed, and it looked like Yahweh had been defeated. You see, the people at that time believed that there were many gods that were gods over different nations. And when one nation would defeat another, they believed it's because that God was stronger than their God. And so for Israel to be defeated in the mind of Ezekiel and the rest of the Israelites would have been that Yahweh had been defeated by the Babylonian gods, that they were stronger than their God. And all of these things had happened because Yahweh was not powerful enough to protect them. And in the vision, Ezekiel sees God on his throne, and he sees four living beings. And it goes on to tell us that these living beings have wheels underneath them with a wheel inside of it, and that the wheels and the living beings are covered with eyes. That's kind of creepy. And that used to scare me as a kid, this idea of these beings covered with eyes, when you think about thousands of eyes on the wings and on their body just blinking and looking different directions. But ancient Hebrew, like ancient Aramaic and Koine Greek, can be difficult to translate into the English. And that word that's translated is a multiple meaning word. It can mean eyes, but it can also mean stars. And I believe stars is actually the better translation, because what do the stars represent to the people of Ezekiel's day? The heavens, where the stars were in space, represented the heavenly beings. They're called the morning stars. And the gods lived in the stars according to the Babylonians. They had a zodiac full of gods that were represented by constellations. And look at what we see, that these beings that I believe are not covered with eyes, I believe they're covered in stars. And Ezekiel chapter 10 and verse 14, Ezekiel tells us some more information. He says, each of the four cherubim had four faces. The first was the face of an ox, the second was a human face, the third was the face of a lion, and the fourth was a face of an eagle. And these four living beings surrounded the throne of God. Now, in the mind of an American, as a kid, I was scared of these things. They had four faces. They had wings and bodies that were covered in eyes. But what would that symbolize? Well, like we already said, I believe that they're covered in stars. They represent the gods of the Babylonians, that the four faces they have represent the four main quadrants, like north, south, east, and west of the Babylonian zodiac. that the face of the human was one of the zodiac signs of the Babylonians. Each of the four represented the gods of the Babylonians in the heavens, in the stars. And where are they? Where did Ezekiel see them? At the feet of Yahweh, under his throne, submitted and subjected to him and his authority. That even though Ezekiel didn't know what was going on in the pages of history, what God showed him was that the gods of the Babylonians are in submission under the feet of the one true God, Yahweh. What does that mean for you and me today? That when we don't know what's going on, God's still on the throne. That it may look like the church is being defeated, that Christianity is dying out, that we live in dark days of evil immorality. But even when we don't know what's going on, and all the chaos and suffering and evil in the world, when we don't know what's going on, he's still on the throne. And just like Ezekiel could take comfort in knowing that the people he believed, that the gods had victory over his God, Yahweh, that Yahweh is the one true God, never to be defeated, and he's still on his throne. So if you've been struggling and suffering under the fear of current events, it's okay. When we don't know what's going on, God's still on the throne. And just like Ezekiel took comfort that we can read that passage and understand he hasn't left. He's still in control. He's still working all things together for good. And we can trust him even in the unknown areas of our life. When we don't know what's going on, he's still on the throne. So take comfort from that this week. And I pray as you go through these dark days that you would shine the light of God in those dark places. Even when we don't know what's going on, he's still on the throne. Be blessed.